next we have the topic of diversity and social impact. Okay, my friends, we have great conversation ahead. And so often companies split the work of corporate social responsibility from their initiatives towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. But how can we better bridge the gap between those two important initiatives and in the process, uplift our teams and communities? PowerToFly's Rosalind Gaubault will explore this question deeper with Qadira Harris, Senior Director, Global Responsibility, Matterport, and Dr. Tiana N. Rogers, the Chief Operations Officer at Rogers Solutions Group, a premium consulting firm committed to providing community-oriented, data-driven, and equity-centric solutions. Okay, I will pass it over to you. And Rosalind, did I get your last name correct?
You did. I'm so impressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great chat, y'all.
Thank you so much, Hunter. Hi, Qadira and Tiana. It is awesome to be speaking with you all today. Welcome again. I would love to begin today's conversation by getting to know a bit more about each of you and your career journeys. Qadira, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation today. So I've worked in the corporate social responsibility space for about 15 years. I've always been fascinated by the way that companies are showing up in the communities where they're doing business, right? So how they're responding to the needs of the communities. And I've also been fascinated by the intersection of equity, largely because of my experience, my lived experience as a Black woman, someone who often, is kind of put in those categories as underrepresented or marginalized. So I've had a unique advantage of leading programs for large Fortune 100 companies. I've worked with international organizations doing social impact work. I've worked on place-based work. And now I work for Matterport, which is a tech company that is in hyper growth mode. So very exciting and interesting career journey.
For sure. It sounds like it. Thank you so much. And Tiana?
Awesome. Thank you for having me as well. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. So my actual journey is slightly different. I actually started in the social sector, working in homelessness, working with child welfare programs, looking at really evidence-based and how to create more equitable centered programming for those marginalized and underrepresented communities. And in the last 4 years, I actually transitioned to higher ed. And so I work also in a business school at the University of Utah, doing a lot of translating research into practice for impact, basically to scale impact, and making sure that we have the evidence that backs up why specific interventions are being used by companies or businesses. I work with a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of philanthropic foundations, and measuring impact for various funds across the world, actually. So excited to be here.
Awesome. I am very admirable work. So I'm going to thank you on behalf of everyone that you've helped. I would love it as well if you all could tell us a bit more about the role and importance of corporate social responsibility, or CSR, in any organization. Tiana, do you want to take that?
First. Yeah, I can go first. So a corporate social responsibility, at its core is about doing good while also doing well. So, typically we think about business and it's really about, I guess historically has been about the bottom line. However, there has been this shift, in our culture, in our society, where folks are more conscious. And so there are these higher expectations for organizations and companies to really influence and create a positive impact on the communities and the societies in which they reside, and those that maybe align with their mission and values. And so for me, and where I kind of sit in this space, it is a given, and it's a necessary component, and it actually should be kind of where folks are looking to play in that space.
I would agree. Tiana definitely took kind of the words out of my mind as I was thinking about the question. I think sometimes we tend to complicate corporate social responsibility. It seems like this cumbersome thing, right? What do we do to get started? But I think exactly to echo, what Tiana said, if we simplify it, it's really about companies responding to communities, right? How are they supporting the communities where they do business and where they have customers? I think depending on the company's maturity and where they are, kind of in their broad business strategy and journey, that may look a little bit different in terms of what initiatives they're going to lean into. But at the end of the day, it's really about responding to the people and to the planet. I can remember early in my career, corporate social responsibility wasn't even a term. It definitely wasn't used as much, if at all. Things like sponsorships and events were really the way that companies were responding to communities. And just as Tiana said, now we're really starting to see this shift where stakeholders are demanding more, right? And so it's really becoming kind of central to companies' overall strategy. So again, it's just really been interesting to see kind of the role of corporate social responsibility evolve over time.
Absolutely. I think to get even more specific then, Qadira, if you could tell us more about the initiatives being taken at Matterport to collectively make strides towards uplifting the teams and communities through CSR and also DEI initiatives.
Sure, absolutely. So I was brought in as the first person in the organization to build and lead this work. So it's an interesting opportunity because we're in building phase, right? So we are new in our efforts as a company, formally putting some effort and focus around what we call global responsibility. And we're at an advantage, I think, because we get to learn from other companies that have come before us. Of course, I'm bringing my experience from other companies that I've worked for, but again, even looking across the tech sector, looking at others out there that are doing it really well who we might want to benchmark against. So for Matterport, global responsibility includes 4 key areas. It's our diversity and inclusion, so how we think internally about being a diverse and inclusive workforce, how we're thinking about building inclusive products. It's our social impact work, so the work that we're putting out into communities, how we're responding philanthropically. It's our sustainability, and then it's also our environmental, social, and governance efforts. At the end of the day, we strive to embed equity and inclusion in everything. So yes, it's things like our employee resource groups, cultural and relevant conversations or discussions that we might be having internally as employees. But it's also, we think about building a donation program that is focused on building inclusive and resilient communities. We launched that program at the end of last year. So for us, we don't separate the two. I was really excited even when I stepped into the role that, again, we really think about the intersection of both. So again, they're not separate initiatives for Matterport. They really are one and the same, and very intentionally, they live under the same umbrella.
That makes absolute sense. I wish that we would be able, well, that is of course a goal of mine, to help companies to integrate DEI and CSR into the foundation of the organization. And so I'm happy to hear that you've been successful at doing that at Matterport.
Thank you.
Tiana, I would love to know from you, how can CSR be implemented in ways that benefits diverse communities and fosters inclusivity?
Yeah, I would say that when you think, I guess how I think about it in this space is really holistically. So kind of how Qadira was outlining, it's not an either or, it's a both and. And so when you think about, oftentimes folks like to segment and kind of silo out different pieces of the work, and really they go hand in hand and they work better and optimally when you do think about them collectively. And so for me, the CSR efforts is about inviting folks to get behind a common vision or a cause. And so it promotes unity. It invites folks to kind of put down those kind of isolating identifiers and to kind of merge and come together behind one common vision. And so I think when you are inviting everyone to the table, and that is age, stage, ability, to be a part of those conversations, you're naturally going to produce a diverse and an inclusive outcome, because you're not trying to replicate or create something that you're not. So, how do I say this? So you can teach what you know, right? As an organization or a business, and saying, we believe in inclusivity, we believe in diversity, but ultimately you're going to create what you are. And so when you're able to kind of start that internally, and thinking about some of those efforts mentioned at Matterport, it's a natural byproduct of the infrastructure that you've created. And so I think that it really is essential. It is the inner work that is often treacherous for some people, and it can be really arduous, and it's really time intensive, and it takes leaning into some difficult conversations maybe, and some awkward maybe moments, right, for some folks. And so being able to have those courageous moments internally will allow it to show externally, and really open it up for there to be more inclusivity and a greater sense of belonging.
Absolutely. Qadira, is there anything that you wanted to add to that as well?
Yeah, I think, gosh, I love everything that Tiana said. You probably saw me here, nodding as she was speaking. I think equity needs to be embedded throughout CSR, right? So just as Tiana was saying, like, it can't be just talked about in diversity and inclusion when you think about, diversity recruiting, or like, I said, talked about employee resource groups, right? It really needs to be embedded in all of your programming, all of your initiatives, even, something like environmental sustainability. Okay, great. What is the company doing to tackle environmental justice, right? Because there's an equity component there as well. So really thinking about how you embed equity in everything, I think, is key. I think that companies need to be looking at systemic inequities and addressing those. What is the systems change? How do you disrupt and rewire the system, and not just quick fixes? I always say, when you were doing this work, not just D&I, but CSR in general, if you are not uncomfortable in your work, you are doing something wrong, because to really address the issues is uncomfortable for most people, right? I think the other thing that should be top of mind is companies should be designing with the intended audience that they are attempting to reach. They need to have a seat at the table. You cannot design something for a group of people, or you should not, without having their input, without having them at the table. So include the groups of folks exactly that you are trying to reach and impact. Find a way to get those folks at the table. How can they inform the design? How can they inform the solution? They know best. Ask, right? It really is about decentering and shifting how we hold power and how we think about power. As I said, I think CSR historically, absolutely, the way that CSR was created absolutely is designed to do good. But I also think that we have to stop and think, if we're not thinking about very intentionally equity and inclusion, what's the harm that it potentially could be doing? Again, when people are left out of the conversation, when people are left out of the decision making, when we're not thinking with an equity lens, it actually can do harm. And that usually is not the intention, right? It really is about doing good. So I think just some of the things that between what I just said and Tiana were saying will get you kind of on the right path to thinking about the intersection of both.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
if I could just add one more thought to that, that actually made me think about, this is actually my LinkedIn cover, and that is, intent does not equal impact. So because you have a good intention, as she just mentioned, that does not mean that the end result is going to be effective, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be positive or even meaningful for the folks that you are creating or designing. And so, part of our ethos at Rogers Solutions Group is that there's this fundamental belief that the people closest to the problem have the solution. And so when you are trying to solve for these complicated social problems, you have to be in a humble position. You have to be willing to learn and listen, because they are going to tell you exactly what they need. And if you're not willing to co-create, then you're missing the whole point, right? Because when we think about impact, there's kind of a spectrum. And so on one side, you have the effort of and the intention of the businesses or the companies, and that sometimes, to Qadira's point, it can sometimes center the entity or the business, right? So it's focused on the giver. Where then you have the other side of the spectrum where it's focused on the folks who are owed justice. And so that is kind of the tension that we have to manage when we are in the impact space and we're thinking about how to be socially conscious and responsible with the resources and the stakeholders and the folks and the customers, and the people that we're impacting, because it takes deliberate intention. And for me as a researcher, it takes data to be able to refer and be able to check in real time whether your efforts are really producing the change and the results that you want to see. So that is really what I wanted to add to that. So thank you for allowing that.
Of course, you added so much there. I definitely appreciate it. And I agree wholeheartedly with everything that you've just said. I know that we have some questions from the audience, so I'm just going to ask that right now. How can entrepreneurs use their personal stories and experiences to create social impact?
Well, I think I'll take a little bit of a stab at that. Of course, Tiana helped me out here as well. I think, again, sometimes when we think about, terms like social impact or corporate social responsibility, you think that you have to have, big dollars, big budget. It could be something like volunteering. If you're a team of one, you can still get out there and volunteer. You can still have your brand out, showing, even as an entrepreneur, that you are out in the community. The other thing that you could be thinking about is how is the very product that you're putting out into society somehow helping to address, or create social responsibility. For example, if you make a certain type of clothing item, are you thinking about proactively how that might contribute to helping, the planet become a better place, right? So I don't necessarily think that we have to think about it in these kind of big, Fortune 100 companies or large companies or are the only entities that can kind of address social impact or do good. I think that even as a team of one person, right, you have an opportunity, and sometimes because you don't have all the red tape and bureaucracy, you can really hone in, identify what you're passionate about, get out there in the community, volunteer. You can absolutely, carve out sometimes minimal dollars out of a budget that you might have and sponsor something. Again, think about how it might show up in the product or service that you're offering. There's absolutely, I bet, a social responsibility component there. So there's absolutely things, even as an entrepreneur, that you can do related to social impact and CSR.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Did you want to add anything to that, Tiana?
I would say just being conscious that this is a all-inclusive sport. Even though you may be a solo entrepreneur, there are so many other things that are intersecting with your work, with your entity. There are so many opportunities for you to partner. As Qadira was mentioning, like it could be something in your backyard. It could be finding vendors that are more diverse, being able to diversify your supply chain with how you're delivering your services or your products. And so I think that we have to realize that your sphere of influence is where you have the greatest impact, because people generally are going to, it's that know, like, and trust factor, right? And so if you are in a environment or a community where people are looking to you as an entrepreneur, you have great influence and you have a significant ability to create impact by the deliberate decisions that you are making in your business. And so, again, it doesn't have to be big. And again, who's defining big? Because where you are, it is going to be big and it is going to have a ripple effect. So just being conscious and thoughtful about how are things intersecting? Where do you intersect with the community in which you reside? And what are some ways that you can partner or get behind other missions? You know, one of the things that I work often with nonprofits around is there's so many, you know, nonprofits, for example, that are addressing homelessness or poverty or things like this. And you see these billion entities with billions of dollars, right? But we still haven't quite moved the needle, right? And so when we think about impact, it's about figuring out who's doing it well, best, and getting behind it instead of recreating the wheel, saying, who can I get behind? Who can I support? And then you're able to kind of double down on those resources. And that's what we call collective impact. So when you're thinking about ways in which to influence the community or the environment in which you reside, start thinking more broadly as well, because there could be opportunities for you to partner with someone else and then to kind of create that greater, more broader collective impact as well.
And if I could just, I love that. If I could just click down on something that Tiana just said that sparked, this work is local. It is really about getting into your local community. And, you know, as I reflect on, and so to that point, we often think that it's kind of the large, big companies that are getting the notoriety, and yeah, maybe because they can put out a press release or they're putting more dollars. But I can tell you, you know, in past lives, when I've kind of, you know, been responsible for those big initiatives, I would show up maybe at a community event. It wasn't the big company that was getting all the attention and pats on the back. It was that local businesswoman, that local businessman, that local business person that had been in that community doing those grassroots efforts, that the camera crews were around and the people in that community had rallied around because they knew that person by a first name basis. The person was of the community. That's the other thing that we have to keep in mind. So I would say don't undersell yourself as the power that you have as an entrepreneur in your local community. Don't shy away from the power that you have in the ability to really do good where you are.
Absolutely. And that kind of points back to what you all mentioned earlier about the people that are closest to it. Like those are the people that need to have the loudest voice within creating change. So yeah, absolutely. CSR gives way for an increased customer engagement and visibility. How can we use this to promote a more positive and equitable workspace image in order to elevate marginalized communities, people of color?
So I'm thinking about this in a couple ways. I think, especially over the last, 18 months or so, we are really seeing the sector of CSR get turned on its head. It used to be, companies typically wouldn't partner with other companies. They wouldn't partner with their customers. They wouldn't try to influence their customers for sake of maybe running them off, right, and losing business. Due to COVID, due to the social injustice and racial reckoning and all the things that the country and the world are going through, we're starting to see this shift in how companies are partnering with customers, partnering with other businesses, and influencing their customers. So I think companies have an opportunity to amplify and use their voice. They also have an opportunity to challenge their customers to say, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. Are you with us or not? And again, I'm just thinking about some of the things that have come up in the last 18 months or so, right? If it's a B2B, if you're a B2B and you're working with your customers in that way, right? Like you can set a standard for what you consider an inclusive space. Again, are you with us? Are you for us or are you against us? The other thing that I think that's important to think about is companies spend billions of dollars understanding their customers and spending habits and things like that, right? And so I think that's another opportunity to think like, who are your customers and are the things that you are doing in communities, in your business strategy, how you're showing up reflective of that, right? So I'm coming at it from a couple of different angles, depending on how and when you're defining your customer and what type of intersection or point that you might want to have with them. But again, I think because we are seeing just this shift in this space, there is such this is a moment in time where it's an opportunity for companies to use their weight, whether again, they're a Fortune 100 or a team of 1 or 2 people, to really think about how they are engaging and influencing their customers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Love
Tiana?
that. I love that. I echo so many of her points. We're like have this synergy. I feel like it's also a prime time, when with organizations around training all the things Qadira just mentioned, this is the prime opportunity to build trust by increasing that transparency and increasing and leaning into accountability. It makes me think of Ben and Jerry's and the work that they have been doing since the pandemic started, and how much more vocal they have been in just saying, no, this is where we draw the line as an organization. And this is where we're putting our advocacy efforts. This is where we're doubling down. And so I think that it's a prime opportunity for us to increase that transparency and that accountability. And also not only just externally, but internally as well. As I mentioned before, at looking at ourselves as entrepreneurs, even my own company, we think about things like, what are some ways that we can elevate the communities, our underrepresented communities, and people like us? How do we reach back? How can we give more? How can we stretch? And challenging ourselves to be better and to show up bigger in this time. And so I think that there are so many ways in which we can do this. And I hope that this is not just a trend that's happening right now. That's kind of the fun kind of thing to be doing, because ultimately the research is very clear that more diverse and more inclusive companies and organizations have better results and better bottom lines. So I hope that there's some validity to the work that's being done and that folks are really paying attention.
Absolutely. I appreciate all of the insights that you all have shared. I think that I've learned a ton along with the rest of the audience. It was super impactful. And so I would love it if you all could share some ways in which the audience can reach out to you both, as well as connect with you.
Absolutely. I'll go first. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to keep the conversation going. You can find me just under my name. And then you can also email me, qharris@matterport.com. So would love to just continue with anyone who's interested.
Absolutely. I echo that. LinkedIn is probably the best. You can see, I don't post too much, but I do post my thoughts around impact and things like that. So you can follow some of my content there. And then you can always check us out at RSG, which is RogersSolutionsGroup.com.
Awesome. I know we have like a minute left, but we got a really good question. So I want to know if one of all you can answer it really quickly. Should there be a shift to where social services are more about empowering communities instead of saving underserved communities?
Absolutely. Because this is not about charity. This is about restoring dignity. And that should be our intention when we think about marginalized communities or underrepresented communities. And that is just where I stand and what I believe.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. We really need to shift from trying to be saviors and just start to be justice warriors and supporting others and ensuring that their voices are heard entirely and we're doing what they request to be done, empowering them. I appreciate you both so much. Thank you for joining us today. This was an absolutely amazing chat. Looking forward to learning more about you and staying connected.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care.